Welcome to the beginning of our motion pictures unit. For those of you who are watching this in the future, I've made it so that you're only looking at the window where I'm sharing the information. Unfortunately, you're not able to see the chat, which is where 8R3, one of my greatest 8th grade classes, is busy in the chat box. And they may become brave and unmute, in which case you may hear some of their lovely voices. We'll see. We'll see. We are now in the motion picture unit, which will finish out our year. I have posted 2 things to begin the week. One of them, they kind of posted at the same exact time, but we're going to look at this one first. Motion picture intro and team strategies. As you can see, there's no assignment this week, and that's because you're still finishing up your photography final project, and that will be due at the end of this week. So while you're working on that, we're going to set up motion picture teams. I will do that after I present this slide presentation. You're going to work in these teams later in the unit when we make movies. Each team will consist of 3 to 5 students who will work together to write, plan, shoot, act in, and edit movies. And those are skills that we'll continue to concentrate on, but one at a time. I will assign teams somewhat randomly, but you'll be able to switch teams if you provide a good reason and convince me that it will solve rather than create a problem. Before we set up our teams, though, we're going to view the attached slide presentation introducing this art form. And Janice, I see your question. She wants to know, wait a minute, we have to act. We'll explore that as we keep going. I don't want you to lose sleep over it just yet. In time, there will be a time to lose sleep over it, just not right this second. Wait, I already have this open. Here we go. Motion picture. It's like a picture, but in motion. Understanding movies. We're going to have a little discussion about this. Entertainment versus art. What's the difference? What do you think? Are movies a form of entertainment, or are they an art form? I'm seeing a lot of people writing both. Have you encountered movies that are definitely one and not the other? I think I have. Somebody wrote Sharknado is a good example. Would you say that Sharknado is more of entertainment, or is that a work of high art? Is that an argument we could make? Somebody else says comedies are entertainment instead of art. Is that all comedies or just certain comedies, and why? I can think of a lot of comedy films that are definitely, they were made in the spirit of art form rather than, entertainment to be slapped on the side of a bus or a Happy Meal or something like that, right? And we can get into also how are movies marketed? What is the movie industry like, and how does that relate to whether a movie is an art form or a product for entertainment purposes, and sometimes even a product that is used to sell stuff, right? Like if we see a lot of kids' movies, they have these marketing tie-ins, right? Can anyone think of one? Movies that basically you wouldn't expect them to ever get released without a line of toys, kids' shoes that have those images all over them, stuff like that. Yeah, a lot of Disney, for example. You see, like, when Cars came out, not only were kids getting these toy cars, but, like, the images of that movie were on pretty much everything. Like, I found a set of like skateboarding pads, like knee and elbow pads that had cars on it. So it doesn't even have to be in any way related to the subject matter of the movie. As long as you can get an image from that movie onto a product, the idea is that you can maybe charge a little more for it, maybe reach a wider audience that otherwise wouldn't have bought that product, except that, kids are taught that when you enjoy something, you enjoy the whole family of brands of that thing, right? So it's not that you enjoy the movie Cars, it's that you enjoy Cars, the brand. And we teach kids to do this from a very young age, right? Anybody still like on board with a brand? Collect stuff. If it has that brand on it, you buy it. And I don't mean like Nike. I mean like something that isn't the manufacturer of the product. So investigate that. This is something that that movies have done, and that's one of the reasons why you see the kinds of dollar amounts floating around in the movie business that you do. But why do movies need to make so much money? Right? You hear about like what they earn at the box office. Hundreds of millions of dollars, right? In a weekend for like an Avengers movie. Exactly. Janice points out because production is really expensive. It's really expensive to produce a movie. You got CGI, you got to pay the actors. What else? Editing, you got to pay your editors for sure. You got to pay for music. All this production. You got to pay all these crews to stand around and rent out the spots to film. And you got the people who are standing on the sidewalk being like, hey, can you please move across the street? We're shooting a movie here. Has that ever happened to anyone? Walking around New York? It used to happen in my neighborhood all the time, like before COVID. They shot all kinds of things there. And it interrupted parking. Like people who parked their cars on the street didn't have a place to park. And also when you're walking around, there's these people standing around with walkie-talkies, and there's like tents set up for like craft services tables and things like that. And they will come up to you and say, I'm sorry, you can't walk here right now. Could you please cross the street and be quiet? Because they're working on this piece of art. And people feel it's very interruptive. So Ryan says there was a movie in Chinatown back then, and I was on the streets playing. So many movies. Yeah, shooting in Chinatown for sure. Actually, Ryan, you mentioned the Ghostbusters movie. I drove down Houston once when they were filming. It was the Ghostbusters, like with the female cast. And I saw the Ghostbuster mobile driving in the opposite direction in, I guess it was Tribeca. Jerry, have you ever asked to be in the movie as an extra? Because that's definitely never happened to me. But sometimes you'll walk past a sign where it says, by walking here, you are giving permission for yourself to appear on camera. And that's something they do because ordinarily, hang on a second.
Pardon the interruption. Mr. Singh, can you please contact Ms. Johnson? Mr. Singh, contact Ms. Johnson.
Ordinarily, you would have to sign some kind of release so that you can't sue them later for using your image to make money. Exactly. So what is the point of a movie? Why do we watch them? Why we've talked a little bit about why they cost so much. Why are movies such a successful industry when it's so hard to make it as like a painter? And are movies a successful industry? Janice points out it's a form of escapism. Albert, not real life. Yeah, for sure. So people are drawn to this, but aren't like paintings and sculptures a form of escapism? Why don't people like go and do that? Like go look at paintings.
Movies are more visually interesting though. Like they move.
Mm-hmm. So you're suggesting that we're kind of automatically more drawn to movies as a way of kind of occupying our time for fun, right? Movies imitate more the experience of being in real life. Theater certainly does that too, and theater definitely we would say was the precursor to this art form in terms of the form of entertainment, right? But why not theater then? Why doesn't everyone just go to like off Broadway plays? Movies are more accessible. Yeah, for sure. So like there's a thing in theater, okay, you can't watch it in your home for sure. But remember, when movies came to prominence, nobody could watch them in their home. You would get dressed up and you would go to a theater as if you were going to go see a play, and then you would sit down and a screen would be there and they would project the movie onto the screen, right? And when they first started, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but when they first started, remember, there was no synchronized sound. So there would be actors up at the front of the movie theater saying the lines out that you would see on screen. This was a big thing in Japan, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And it caused ripples throughout the history of early cinema. So yeah, it's the experience of movie watching. Certainly you can do things with producing a movie that you can't do live on stage, right? You can do jump cuts, you can have more elaborate sets, you can have special effects and things like that, where if you're sitting in a theater, you're limited to like actors and props. So it's an expanded form of theater. It's like theater 2.0, let's say. Let's look at how a motion picture camera works. So we're going to kind of dial this back a little bit. We've talked a little bit about this art form and why it is so relevant to so many people. Remember, films play a huge role in shaping culture. Many of the memes and GIFs and stuff that we're sending each other come from movies that maybe we haven't even watched, but they're so critically important to our culture that they become like stand-in metaphors for ways of expressing other things, right? A motion picture camera basically works like a regular camera, but with a mechanism which feeds the film into the chamber in a sequence of time called a frame rate. The standard frame rate for film is 24 frames per second, but some slow motion cameras can capture as many as 70 trillion frames per second, and those kind of cameras would be used to capture images of things like collisions and particle accelerators, not so much shooting movies that contain a narrative. The shutter opens and closes once for every frame, although it does not necessarily open for the entire time that the film is loaded during that frame, because the shutter speed may be able to be adjusted independently of frame rate. So, in other words, while the camera might load the film behind the shutter 24 times per second, the shutter might only open for a much shorter time during each of those seconds, okay, depending on the exposure settings. So if you're filming in a really bright, clear day outside, you probably only want the shutter open for like 1/500th of a second, as opposed to the entire 24th of a second. And you can, if you do the math, you understand that's a much smaller period of time. In the diagram on the right, you can see that the shutter revolves rather than tilts with a mirror like an SLR. So an SLR camera would do this, and a film camera, like a video motion picture film camera, would do this. Make sense? So I mentioned video camera. What about a video camera? How does a video camera work? Well, here's an assignment I could give you. Maybe I will, maybe I will, maybe I will. I won't. As you can see, a video camera is a little bit different. You've got the light coming in through the lens. It goes through a first relay lens. I don't really understand what a relay lens is, except my understanding is that it would carry the light in a certain shape so that it doesn't get sequentially out of focus. It maintains the focus, basically. That's going through beam splitters and getting divided through onto 2 mirrors and then through 3 polarizers, which filter out certain frequencies of light, through second relay lenses, which maintain that focus, and into something that I believe is called a Saticon. You got the blue, the green, and the red tubes, and those go into a processor out to your video signal. You need to know this. You don't. One of the first motion pictures was made by the Lumiere brothers in 1895. They are the guys who coined the term cinema. So let's check this out. This is one of the first motion pictures. So let's notice a few things. One, the film was short. That's because the technology was new, so nobody was making long rolls of film that they could just buy and stick in the camera. You've probably seen longer GIFs. The shot is static, meaning it doesn't move around, but you can see little shaky movements because in order to move the film through the camera, it had to be cranked by hand. An automatic mechanical crank just hadn't been invented yet. The camera was placed on a rigid base, possibly a tripod, which held it in place, but was probably made of wood, allowing for a little bit of flexibility and movement due to the force of the hand cranking. Hand cranking is also the reason you see a variable frame rate in very old films. People don't appear to be moving or walking at a consistent rate, and that's because there's that human element of turning the crank, and that was a skill that people had to acquire. And if you're a filmmaker and you're working with a person who's cranking the camera maybe for the first or second time ever, they're probably not going at a consistent speed, right? And it's probably very hard to do. The composition is dynamic, meaning it gives you a sense of movement within its depth or three-dimensionality. Three-dimensionality because the train doesn't just move from far away to close in or from the side, it also moves right to left, right? So there's a sense of depth in the composition created vertically as well, with the mountains in the distance and the people in the foreground. Albert mentioned that he remembers a funny story about this. Apparently people actually thought there was a train coming into the station and panicked. Very close. It wasn't this movie, but it was when there was a famous early motion picture where the camera was placed kind of between the tracks on the ground, and you see the train coming in kind of right over top of the camera. And it's true that when they first screened this, Western audiences leapt out of the way because for them, they had never seen something coming towards them like that, right? But interestingly, Eastern audiences who had grown up with things like shadow puppetry and other forms of like two-dimensional theater where things could grow and shrink in size very easily, weren't as moved by it. They said, you know, they were entertained, but they weren't like, you know, it wasn't like seeing a VR movie for the first time for them. Got a little bit more vocab. Let's see. Ryan asks, what if you spin it faster? If you crank a camera faster, what do you think happens? You're capturing more frames per second, and then when you play it back at 24 frames per second, do you think the motion looks slower or faster? Faster frames? No, it looks slower. Remember, the higher the frame rate, the slower the motion. Whether it blurs or not is a question of your shutter speed, right? Not the frame rate, but the shutter speed. Those are two different things. Okay? If you keep your shutter open longer, you can get more blur in the image. But you know, you could have a shutter that's open for the full 24th of a second. And if you've ever played with a SLR camera, you know that a 24th of a second, it's very easy to get a blurry image. It's a long time for the shutter to be open. All right, let's look at some more vocab. Everything depicted within a scene, the setting, the action, the arrangement and movement of the actors, the lighting, even the sound is collectively known as the mise en scène. Many film terms, by the way, are French, in no small part because of the Lumiere brothers, although this term actually owes its roots to stage theater. The still frame depicted at right is from a samurai epic called Ronin by the great Akira Kurosawa. Note the use of color in the background, the middle ground, and the foreground to create a dynamic sense of depth within the mise en scène. Kurosawa, by the way, started off as a painter, so he brought that sensibility to his work as a filmmaker. The composition is so powerful that it evokes three-dimensional movement, even though this is just a still frame. And one of the remarkable things about the film Ronin is that he uses entire landscapes like this as his set. You'll see a scene like this, and in the distance on those mountaintops, you'll see an army assembling, and none of it is CGI. He really set that up. So, in fact, this movie's so good, we're going to watch the trailer. It's not a trailer, really. It's
No matter how bad things may seem, they can always get worse. And there's no better reminder of this sad fact than Ron, Akira Kurosawa's 1985 masterpiece. From the last phase of his career, one of the bleakest and harshest movies I've ever seen, and also one of the most staggeringly beautiful. I can't think of very many other examples of films that have such a variety of different visual effects so coherently blended together. So you have these wide horizontal compositions, a sense of vertical scale that almost makes you dizzy, and these intimate scenes that take place indoors or just in ragged, drab landscapes. Ron, which is set in medieval Japan, unfolds on a plane of archetype and myth. But it's also full of very realistic performances, and it works nicely as a study of human behavior and psychology. The story in Ron is suggested by Shakespeare's King Lear. An aging warlord, usually accompanied by his fool, decides to split up his lands and his castle among his 3 sons. And as soon as he does this, all hell breaks loose. King Lear is certainly one of Shakespeare's more desolate tragedies, but it does at least have at its heart the idea or ideal of benevolent authority and a reasonable political order. In Ron, though, the elderly Lord Ichimonji, the Lear figure, is revealed to have been all along as bloodthirsty and cruel as any of his sons. Akira Kurosawa was a master of the samurai genre, and in Ron he dwells, as he often did, on military heroes and the women who love and manipulate and die for them. These characters at least have a heroic destiny ahead of them, either of conquest or of noble death. But what about the rest of us? Our fate is suggested by the film's haunting final shot. It shows us not a military hero, but a minor character named Surumaru. A blind man, an innocent victim of the war that rages all around him, who's lost the last protection that he had, a picture of the Buddha. And now he stands alone in the midst of ruins at the edge of the abyss.
So, clearly, sorry, not a trailer. That was kind of a little article about it. Albert, we're not going to have time to watch all 3 hours of Run together as a class, but I will look for a link. I'll talk a little bit about how I will be, here we go, providing you some ability to watch these films. During this unit, I will be giving you the names of filmmakers and the movies they made. Whenever possible, I will provide a link to watch the movie for free online. Obviously, I can't really require you to watch the movies, but I will just say that I refuse to share with you the names of any movies I don't think you'd enjoy, and I refuse to share with you the names of any movies that I don't think are of the utmost high quality, both in terms of what you get out of them as movies and in terms of their importance as contributions to the art form. Time permitting, we'll watch some short movies and parts of feature-length movies together in class. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's look at, we're going to make teams a little bit later, so I want to kind of circle back to that. here's the recommended viewing material. This is where I'm going to be parking any names of movies that I feel like you should definitely check out because they're highly relevant to what we're going to talk about. I'm just quickly going to kind of go through this list with you right now. And as you can see, we jump around a lot in terms of time and geography. I want your introduction to this art form to be global and to span more than just, what's been going on in, let's say, American cinema in the last 20 years. There's so much more to this art form than that, and you're really missing out if you don't get a little bit of a taste for it. So I've already provided a few links. Wherever you see a link, it's for you to watch the entire film online for free. I'm not posting links to trailers because you can always find that stuff. And none of these are like shady, weird links. They all go to fairly okay places where you can watch it like legally. So as you can see, like I've divided it into categories. I'll go ahead and add Ron here to Japanese cinema. So that was Ron. Did we say 1985? Kira Kurosawa. So I'll look for that for you. So you can see I got a German expressionist, Nosferatu the Vampire, which we learned about during the time when we were actually studying German expressionism. You've got a documentary section, and we will talk a little bit about the meaning of documentary and what the term means, what it doesn't mean in terms of filmmaking. Italian neorealism, Japanese cinema, that's kind of a temporal look at it. Asian and Russian cinema, African cinema, New Iranian cinema, which is kind of my pet favorite among the group, Middle Eastern and Balkan cinema, other European cinema, American independent cinema, and Hollywood and Hollywood adjacent. There are some really important movies that have come out of our big Hollywood machine. None of the ones listed here are the kind you'd find on the side of a lunchbox, but still really worth looking at. Another really great one I want to put down here is other animated. The Good Dinosaur. It was from, I want to say 2016, 2015, 2014, something like that. I'll add the details later. Yeah, Janice, The Good Dinosaur is a masterpiece, and it was a box office flop. And it was an American Western movie done as a story of dinosaurs if they hadn't gone extinct. Yeah, Janice, I'm 100% with you right there. In fact, I don't think any of the animated movies I've listed here are not tearjerkers, including, of course, Grave of the Fireflies, which I listed under Japanese cinema. So I hope that you will, check out this list. I'm going to go back in and add that. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of going through and looking for links to put with these so that you can watch these movies for free online. Some of them are not PG-13 rated. Some of them probably you should, seek guidance from a parent or a grown-up before watching. Be aware that some of these movies might contain things like violence, nudity, or depictions of violence, depictions of nudity, depictions of strong language and things and strong themes. So just be aware of that in general when we're studying filmmaking. This is an art form that has in many ways attempted to really hold a mirror up to real life. And if something terrible happens in real life, it's a good chance that a filmmaker is going to also want to create a depiction of it if they deem it relevant. Okay, so that is going to conclude the time traveling portion of our class today.